I'm Greg Grugan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, Houston attorney and conservative commentator Gary Polland. Next up, longtime Houston journalist and social worker Chow Nguyen. In the 3 spot, writer and public policy analyst Charles Blaine. Batting cleanup, Bill King, well-known businessman, columnist, and fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute. And closing us out, education and public safety advocate Paul Castro. Let's begin.
There has been at least 162 homicide cases filed in Harris County, Texas, for defendants released on 1 or more bonds at the time of a new murder offense. Think about that. 162 people needlessly killed, families grieving and suffering because this legislature failed to enact common sense, fair legislation.
Houston State Senator Joan Huffman pleading with colleagues to deliver overdue relief for families of Texas crime victims, past and future. Senate Joint Resolution 5 would grant Texas criminal court judges the discretion to deny violent defendants bond if there is clear and convincing evidence that denial is necessary to preserve public safety or to ensure the defendant's appearance in court. This proposed bonding discretion for those on the bench has drawn vocal support from a bipartisan coalition of prosecutors, including the Democratic DAs for Dallas and Fort Bend counties.
There should be no constitutional right for perpetrators to prey on Texas citizens. But that's what's happening.
If judges had made the appropriate decision and had this tool, I believe those people would still be alive.
SJR 5 was approved on a 29-2 vote, with Houston freshman State Senator Molly Cook publicly lodging her opposition. The measure now heads to the House, where a 2/3 vote is required to place the bond reform measure on the statewide ballot for Texans to ultimately decide. Panel House Democrats have managed to derail bond reform in the 2 previous sessions, preventing a referendum, triggering victim advocates to charge that by their inaction, they share blame for the lives lost. No one knows more about this than you, Paul Castro. Your thoughts on SJR 5?
Yeah, so I support it. My concern is the rationale behind those who are opposing it. And so I'll specifically call out my state senator, Molly Cook, who said that her concerns were that it was failing to expand right to counsel, it applied too broadly for violent offenses, and it directed bail officers to consider the likelihood to appear versus the willful failure to appear. And that to me is insufficient. The fact that her comment said nothing about victims and about the safety of the community is deeply concerning to me. My mom's family grew up in poverty. They raised us as working class kids, and we raped, killed, and stole exactly as much as our community forced us to, which is 0, right? So putting off, like, oh, well, let's think about what caused people to be here, what created this situation where this person became a killer. No, what should be considered and concerning is what happens to the community because we have 200 killers out on the street right now on bond who are continuing to do things. Because what we don't know is how many of them are the ones that are responsible for these unsolved murders. If you've pulled a trigger once, you're going to pull it again. I worry about that, and there are people who are against this who are more worried about the rights of the accused. And if that's where you start, if that's your starting point, you've lost the narrative.
Chow Nguyen, you help victims of sexual assault put their lives back together. Many of them live in fear. Your thoughts here?
Well, my heart hurts for Paul and so many victims' families who have lost loved ones in violent crimes. This is a tough issue, but so long as this legislation is narrow enough to keep offenders, sexual assault offenders and violent criminals behind bars, how can anybody in the community not support it? Look, I counsel a lot of survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault who've lost family members, and they want accountability and they want to stay safe, and safety is a community-wide problem. I say if we keep it narrow and we look at those violent offenders who have repeated themselves and keep them behind bars, we do have to address other issues like jail overcrowding, et cetera. But we start from there. We start with the safety of families, accountability, and justice, quite frankly.
Day in, day out, Gary Polland is in our criminal courts defending Houstonians. Is this discretion needed by judges?
I think it's appropriate to give the judges discretion, and I think that what's important to stress, and in reference to what Molly Cook said, the burden of proof on the state to establish a no-bond situation under this bill is clear and convincing evidence. That's the second highest level of burden of proof we have in our entire judicial system. It is a significant burden, and I think that's the safeguard that we have for those who should not be put in that situation. But I think our judges need the tools to do what's appropriate under the circumstances, as, by the way, the state, and where they believe this person is a danger to our community. And the statistics cited by Senator Huffman are just outrageous, that we have 168 people dead, killed by somebody out on bond.
You know, a lot of our viewers may not know that Charles Blaine goes into penitentiaries to counsel and help guide folks who are trying to rebuild their lives. Charles, what do you make of SJR 5? Is this something needed in a community where public safety has been consistently the most important issue?
Well, I mean, I think Paul brings up a good point. The victim should be at the center of this, but I do want to emphasize that we have to balance the two. We do have to look at the rights of the accused and what they're afforded. And the thing when it comes to this is that discretion is only as good as who's applying it. And I think for a long time here in Harris County, conservatives in particular have complained about the judiciary and them applying discretion and letting some people out. And so how are we reassured that the discretion is going to be applied appropriately moving forward? I do think that overall SJR 5 is good. I think if it's on the ballot, I'm probably going to vote for it. But I think some of the concerns raised are valid. And I think even our friend Bob last week brought up some of the concerns that he had about the wide net that this might be able to cast with some people who may unintentionally be brought into it. So I do think there are some questions. Maybe they'll be hashed out when it gets to the House.
Bill King, the political landscape. This measure has passed the Senate easily, but Democrats have been able to derail it in the House because they've stuck together on this. 30 seconds.
So the Texas Constitution bail provisions are a mess. They relate all the way back to the founding of the state and some historical circumstances at that time. It absolutely needs to be amended. The Senate has put something forward. The House needs to look at it. If they've got problems with it, they need to amend it and send it back to the Senate. The problem is in the last session, it was killed quietly in calendars, probably by a Houston area state representative, and that's not the way to address this problem. Amend it, send it back to the Senate, have a conference committee, but the law needs to be updated.
Progress, not perfection. Still to come, President Donald Trump drifting into misinformation, accusing Ukraine of instigating the war with Russia, and then walking it back. But up next, our discussion of bail reform continues with none other than Harris County's top prosecutor, Sean Tier, in the House to offer his perspective.